Thank you, Amanda and Cheryl and Rennie, and good morning and welcome to those of you who are joining us up online today. You know, as I'm sitting there listening to Amanda sing this lovely song, all of a sudden I thought, oh, I forgot some announcements. So here's an announcement. At the end of this lesson, we're going to welcome Liz Zay as a new member. So, yay! So ushers and greeters, everybody stay put until we officially crown Liz Queen of the Day, and we will go forward from there. So, you know how stuff runs through your mind, which is exactly why we're talking about today. You know, this is a busy week. First of all, Tuesday is Mardi Gras. Shrove Tuesday, or Fat Tuesday, as it's sometimes called. And then, of course, Ash Wednesday. Now, really what that's all about is Mardi Gras is the day when we party. We eat, drink, everything we want, and Wednesday is the day we regret everything we ate and drank the day before. Now, if you were born and raised in traditional Christian liturgy, as I was, you know that Ash Wednesday is the beginning of the 40 days we call Lent. There are actually 46 days, but the Sundays are not counted in that count, which is it's kind of like a free day, you know, when you go around the board and it's like a free day. So it's the 40 days prior to Easter. And then you're going to say, gee, that sounds kind of familiar, and it does, because we also have a spiritual preparation time for Christmas that we call Advent. Well, why do we have these kind of places in the calendar that we kind of set aside this time to prepare for whatever Christmas or Easter event that it is? Because we know historically that when Constantine became the emperor in the early 300s, that he struggled to keep his empire, which went all the way from India to England, just a little bit of territory, together. And he thought that if he was brilliant, the one factor he saw that was on the horizon that seemed to hold together was Christianity. So at that point, and officially really marking the date of about 325, Constantine decided to make Christianity political. It is from that moment forward that we know a Christianity that has always been interwoven in politics. But prior to that, it was not. It was a small group of people throughout the empire in little enclaves and church houses, the ecclesias that we would see all throughout Greece and Turkey and all the way to Spain and to England and into North Africa. And these were passionate people and believers. But you know, suddenly the carpet just got kind of taken out from under them when thousands of people began to join Christianity because it was politically correct. It was the way to get a job. And they said, you know, we're losing something here. We're taking this, what was precious to us, what was holy and sacred to us, and we've just kind of watered it down. You ever watered something down too much? It just doesn't taste good at all. It doesn't have the punch. It doesn't have the power. So they began in the early 400s and later on into the 500s to set aside these times. Advent was first, Lent was second, where we would have this time of preparation, that we would have this time where we would commit to doing something with our spiritual practice that was a little different. Now, in the early church, that precursor to Easter was always the preparation for baptism. In the very early church, now I'm talking not too long after Jesus died, in the 30s, we see that, you know, if you wanted to be a Christian, you just kind of came in and sat down. But later on, very early on, we see that there was a course of instruction. In fact, not too very many years ago, we found one of the course of instruction books. It's called the Didache, and it was written, scholars believe, around the year 90. And what happened is that when you wanted to be a Christian, you would begin a course of instruction to be baptized. There were no such thing as infant baptisms in those days. Okay, we're talking about adults. So if you wanted to be Christian, you had to learn about the life of Christ. You had to learn about Paul. You had the fledgling Gospels were coming into the marketplace and were becoming more available to people. Of course, we had those precious letters to Paul that were from Paul that were circulated about. In the early days, it took a year to become a Christian, and you were baptized on that holy Saturday night as they lit the new candle for the dawn of Easter Sunday morning. As time went on, you had to study for 3 years. It was about prayer and fasting. It was about being involved in your community, and then you would become a Christian. And I thought that was interesting, how there was this evolution of what it meant to be a Christian and the commitment that you had. It wasn't just showing up. And with this incredible structure, people have changed their lives. People have come into a whole new way of being. And suddenly Constantine just went, that doesn't count anymore. Psh, throw it out. Because if you want a job and you want to work for me, you have to become a Christian. So those Christians who had gone through the program, shall we say, said, no, this isn't right. We're going to set aside some time for this spiritual preparation. Maybe we're not being baptized this year, but we can still walk with somebody who's going to be. You know, when I was a child, I grew up in the Catholic faith, and my parents still to this day are very devout Catholics. And we always had an Advent wreath at Advent, the spiritual preparation for Christmas. But at Lent, we always did some spiritual practice. And more often than not, we prayed the rosary. Now, I want you to think about, because I've been reflecting on this. When we were very small, we would have dinner for 40 days. We would put the dishes in the sink, and we would literally kneel down, please, no leaning on the furniture, and we would say the rosary every single night. Can you imagine having a 5, 6, and 8-year-old child praying the rosary for 40 days every night? And we did this for years. It just became the ritual and the routine. It was something that, you know, it's interesting to me now because, of course, my parents, my father, my mother's deceased, but my father continues to pray the rosary every day for his family. My father will be 94 next month. You know, and I can't help but wonder, what kind of consciousness did my parents set into motion by being an example of practicing a spiritual discipline? Now, it's not my spiritual discipline today, yet didn't they communicate without words, without theology, without a lecture, how important their spiritual journey was, that they would take their children, of course, as the adult, they had to set aside time too, to corral us all into the living room, to get us to finally settle down, and to begin, everybody find their rosary, go through the whole thing, get your jammies on, you know, wash your hands, all of that you do with kids, and to finally come into that prayerful space and leave a legacy to us of being in a consciousness of prayer. A consciousness of prayer. One of my favorite stories is, and I'm saying we're very young at this point. We only had one phone. Remember the one in the dining room? This is long before an answering machine. And the phone rang and rang, and we all knew no one answered the phone during the rosary. No one dared call during the rosary, okay? But for some reason, someone was calling, and they hung up, and they called again. And they hung up, and they called again. Finally, my mother was very annoyed, and she looked at my brother and said, go answer the phone. So now my brother Don is probably 6 years old at this point. He goes over to the phone and he says, "We can't talk to you now. We're praying the rosary." And he hangs up. So he comes back into the living room. My father, in the name of the Father, the Pope Bob, he keeps running right along. So after we finished the rosary, my mother said, "Don, who was on the phone?" "Oh, it was Grandpa. He wanted to tell you that Grandma's in the hospital. She had an accident." We had new rules about answering the phone after that. But, I thought to myself, maybe that isn't my spiritual traditions today. But I think to myself, what kind of foundation did they leave me? You see, it wasn't where they just said, "Well, I dropped the kids off at the door and you kids go to church and have a good time." Oh, no. We went as a family and we stayed. And I beg you, those of you with family, those of you with grandchildren, think about the impact that you could make on, your own family by a conscious, intentional prayer circle of some nature during this time called Lent. This time called Lent. That we begin to have a spiritual practice. See, I think what happened here, or at least for me, is that now that I don't pray the rosary, that's not my spiritual practice, I think what Lent is doing is calling me up to do something different. So in other words, my parents always prayed the rosary. They continue to pray the rosary even to this day. But for those 40 days, they did something very different, right? We prayed the rosary as a family in the living room, kneeling down. It was a ritual. So I can't help but wonder, embedded in this idea of Lent is a challenge to us. How can we tweak for 40 days our regular spiritual practice? Now, maybe your spiritual practice is reading the daily word. Maybe your spiritual practice is meditation. Maybe your spiritual practice is reading the big book of AA. Whatever your spiritual practice is, the daily spiritual practices that you do, I think this 40 days of Lent is challenging us to come up with how we might grow, deepen. I think of the season, right outside our door. What we have to do between now and kind of April 15th is we got to clean the flower beds, don't we? We've got to start getting out in the garden and making sure all the trellises are set up. We need to make sure that the vines, all the dead stuff is cut away. Why? Because we want to see the spring grow, the new flowers, and they need to have all this stuff out of the way. Well, isn't that true in our spiritual life? If we are really wanting to see transformation, if we're really wanting to see new life and new birth, then don't we have to kind of clear things out? And this is what I think this process of Lent and challenging ourselves to a greater a tweaking of our spiritual practice will help us. Because what I saw in that as a young child, or the communication to me, was that a spiritual practice was important and that it takes commitment and discipline. That my spiritual practice, their spiritual practice, took commitment and it took the discipline to do it for those days. So I've got to thinking about that. When we were kids, it was about giving up candy or giving up television. Oh my gosh, we had to turn the television off. There's only 2 shows on anyway, but you had to turn the television off. Now it's 24/7. But this idea that we had to give something up. And yet at the same time, by praying the rosary, they were also saying you have to do something. It's not just a passive giving something up. It's about taking an activity and doing something, investing yourself and your time and your energy into something new, something different, something that will challenge you a little bit. If nothing else, to remember that you made the commitment to do it. How many of you, I'm going to read the daily word every day. And then about the 3rd day in, I'm thinking, what did I say I was going to do? Oh, yeah, I was going to read the daily word. Now I'm 3 days behind. I have to catch up, right? It's the same idea. It's this commitment and discipline to do it. And then I thought, well, now, wait a minute. All too often, we think about it in the terms of giving up, or we also talk in unity about giving up our negative thinking. That's a part of the unity tradition, that we're crossing out and crossing over from those negative thoughts and negative impressions and negative feelings. And then I thought, wait a minute. What is our greatest spiritual discipline? What is our greatest, I should say, what is our greatest spiritual practice? Our greatest spiritual practice is to live into the gifts we were given. That's your spiritual practice. You don't have to find one or make one or think you don't have one. You do have one. It's living into the life that you were given in a creative manner. And I'm going to pick on Amanda here today because she just does some wonderful music for us. Amanda's spiritual practice is music. Now, playing the piano, playing the chords, that's the discipline. It's the commitment to show up every Sunday ready to go. But music is the spiritual practice. It is her creative gift. It is her art. And there comes a point in time, and I love to watch for it every Sunday, when Amanda stops playing the music and the music starts playing Amanda. Isn't that the truth? You bet. So we take that and we say, oh, but she plays music. Folks, you bake cookies, you have art forms, you write poetry, you do journaling, you do photography, you play with your grandkids. That is your creative art form. And what you are trying to do in this Lenten time as you tweak your spiritual practice is to open up to a greater depth of the very life that you're living, of that practice. And you see, here's what keeps you from it. I'm not good enough. Oh, nobody will ever want. You know, I just don't think I have any. When people say to me, I'm not creative, I want to cry for them. I want to weep for you. Because what you are doing is you are negating the very life of God within you. God, as creator, created you to be creative. And creativity is a full spectrum of simply living uniquely as who and what you are. And the challenge then is, the negative thought is to stop negating your own existence. It's to saying, I am creative. I am exploring. I am a good writer. I am a poet. I am that bonding of that consciousness of I am, and that is my spiritual practice being lived out in everyday life. And so we want to, during these 40 days, find and really listen to the inner place of our spiritual practice. What do you already do? For example, for me, I get up in the morning. A cup of tea is always involved in my spiritual practice. I have a cup of tea, and I read the daily word, and I journal, and I have 30 minutes of meditation. But that's what I do every day. How am I going to tweak it? In these 40 days, how am I going to tweak that? How am I going to shift it? Like my parents said the rosary all the time, but during Lent, we had to sit down, or we had to kneel down in the front room and absolutely do it differently. Say it differently. Be with it differently. How are you and I going to look at our creative gifts and somehow invest in them differently to release the negative thought? Now, I'm going to give you a suggestion that has come up to my mind lately, because as many of you know, I've had a slew of friends over these past 6 months, my own personal friends from many, many years who have passed away. And when I'm in the memorial service and afterwards, I hear myself as well as everyone say, I wish I would have called them. So here's your spiritual assignment. For the next 40 days, I want you to find a friend today and text them. Don't make it long and involved, because if you make it, I'll call them. No, you won't, because it's too long. Text them, Facebook Messenger, send them an email. If you really got a lot of cards that you need to get rid of and the stamps, send a card a day. Okay? My point is this, our basic spiritual practice is connecting with one another. Is saying, I behold the Christ in you. Well, how do we do that if we don't honor our friends and our loved ones? Saying, you're important to me. You know what? You came across my heart this morning. Just wanted to say that. Love you. How long does it take you to do that? It shifts dramatically. And when you say, well, I don't have any friends, I don't have any, then why don't you reconnect to the friends you have? See, and I've really heard this in my own life. How many times, Marianne, are you going to stand there at somebody's memorial and say, if I'd have just picked up the phone the day I was thinking of them? How many of you have had that experience? We all have. So I'm going to challenge you to find something that is a broadening, a deepening, a stretching of your spiritual practice. And here's why. Over the course of a year, you and I just live a human life. I mean, we're busy, we got things to do, we got places to go, we got an agenda, it's about time. And what happens over the course of time, it's like kicking water, when you're in the tub, when you're in the pool, you're kicking water. And here's your spiritual life, and here's your human life, and it gets farther and farther apart. And Lent is the opportunity to spend just a little bit of time on this side. And what happens, God is so good. Because God doesn't say, listen up, Marianne, that's not enough time. God said, thank you. What does Scripture tell us? Love God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul. You do that every day for 5 minutes while you're texting a friend. And what happens is this forward momentum begins to slow. And the spiritual momentum begins to match. And when we come to Easter, what is transformation? We're vibrating at the same pace. Our human life and our spiritual life, before they get out of alignment again, because they will, life is just life. But these are times, both in Advent and Lent, that are going to give us a marker in the sand where we can say, stop, take a breath. Let's get back in alignment. It's like a spiritual chiropractor. Let's get back in alignment, right? Let's get our chakras in alignment. Let's get our life in alignment. And when we get in alignment, we're working on the same vibrational rate. And as we come into the Easter time, that sense of new life is a sense of peace. That sense of resurrection is a sense of a dawning, of an opening and an awakening of our whole life, not just the little part that is human. They always put in the traditional church, put the ashes on your forehead to remind you you're human. And I don't know about you, but I'm so invested in my human. My human is out there doing my human thing. My human looks like this. My human's going here. My human is this, that, and the other thing. And it's easy to forget that one day this human will just drop away. And the only vibration that will continue to live is this one. So I'm investing this Lent, and I challenge you. Look for the depth in a practice that you already do. Tweak it a little bit for these next 40 days. Allow it to deepen you, stretch you, commit you, and discipline you to making sure it happens every single day. And at the end of those 40 days, as we come into Easter, which is April 12th this year, we have that experience of light and life and new life within our own mind and heart and life this day. Thank you for joining me today, and God bless.